He thought the worst was over until he found 2 dying giants in his yard. The storm had howled through the night like a wounded animal, rattling Ezekiel Marsh's windows and tearing shingles from the roof of a home already too tired to stand. By morning, silence fell so thick it pressed against his ears. No birds, no cattle, just the uneasy stillness that comes after nature has finished something cruel. He stepped outside expecting to find another dead calf. Instead, he found them. They were lying near the far fence, half buried in fog and mud, as if the earth itself had tried to swallow them. 2 women, massive, motionless, broken. Blood stained the wet soil around their bodies in long, dark streaks. He froze, not just because they were Apache, and not just because they were wounded, but because they were colossal. The first, maybe 6.5 feet, built like a war horse, her arms thicker than most men's legs. The second made her look small, 7 feet tall if she stood easily, shoulders broader than any door Ezekiel had ever walked through. Her face, even slack with unconsciousness, looked carved from stone. No war cries, no drums, no warriors hiding in the brush. Just 2 dying legends in the dirt of a man no one would miss. He should have turned back. That's what any sane settler would have done. Helping them meant treason, death, or worse. But he couldn't move. His boots rooted to the mud, heart hammering so loud it drowned out the wind. The taller woman stirred, barely. Her eyes cracked open, dark and sharp despite the blood in them. She saw him. And in that instant, Ezekiel saw not a savage, not a threat, but a woman who was terrified she wouldn't live through the hour. Her lips moved. No sound came, only breath. Her hand twitched toward the other woman, her sister maybe, and then fell back into the mud. He knew that look, that helpless, aching desperation. He had seen it 3 winters ago when fever took his sister, and he sat powerless, holding her hand as her body failed. This was the same, only now he could do something. He dropped the rifle. His knees hit the earth beside them. The shorter one was burning up, blood pulsing slow and thick from a wound just under her ribs. The taller giant's breaths came sharp, shallow. She was slipping. Ezekiel's voice caught in his throat. "God help me," he muttered, sliding his arms beneath the heavier of the 2. She was dense, muscle and weight, and dead heat. Every breath felt stolen from death. He wasn't a hero, just a forgotten man on a dying ranch. But in that moment, kneeling in the blood-soaked mud with giants fading in his arms, Ezekiel Marsh made a choice no lawman, settler, or soldier would understand. He chose to save them anyway. She woke just before the light broke over the hills, with a sound so low Ezekiel thought at first it was wind through the shutters. But then it came again, a breath, a word maybe, raw and broken like the voice of something half alive. He turned from the table where he'd been boiling water, and there she was, the taller one, awake. Her eyes were open, dark and steady, like twin blades peering through the dimness. She didn't flinch at the sight of him, didn't reach for a weapon or try to rise. She just stared, as if measuring the space between them and deciding whether he was monster or miracle. He moved slow, palms open. "You're safe," he said softly, not sure why. He wasn't even sure it was true. Her mouth twitched, dry and cracked. "Water," she rasped. He held the cup to her lips. She drank, not like someone who'd forgotten how, but like someone who didn't trust there'd be more. Her throat worked as she swallowed. Then she pushed his hand away with surprising strength for someone so hurt. She looked around, eyes scanning the cabin, the door, the rifle leaning in the corner. Then her gaze found the other figure lying still beneath the blankets. "Sister," she said, voice cracking with urgency. "She's alive," Ezekiel answered quickly. "Lost a lot of blood. Fever's coming on." The woman tried to sit up. A sharp gasp escaped her, and her arm buckled. Ezekiel caught her before she hit the floor. Even weakened, she was heavy as stone. No, don't move yet," he said, easing her back down. "You'll tear something open." "Help her," she whispered. "Please." Her accent bent the words, but their meaning landed like a hammer. "I'm doing everything I can," he murmured. She closed her eyes, head fallen back, breath ragged. Then with effort, she opened them again. "I am Ayanna," she said. "She is Etel. We are daughters." "Of who?" Ezekiel asked, though something in him already knew. She didn't answer, but her eyes held the weight of legend. He'd heard stories around campfires, back when the world was simpler, of Apache women taller than horses, born to fight, born to command. Not myths, warnings. "If you see them," the old trappers used to say, "run. They don't come alone." But these two had come with no one. "You're daughters of a chief," he said quietly. Ayanna didn't nod, didn't confirm, but she didn't deny it either. Outside, the wind was rising again, whispering through the trees like voices from another world. Ezekiel sat beside the wounded sisters, heart pounding in his chest. He'd saved them. That much was done. But now came the harder part, keeping them alive, and somehow keeping the world from finding out what he'd done. And still, in Ayanna's voice, there had been something more than desperation. There had been trust. The fever was getting worse. Etel's skin burned under the damp cloth Ezekiel kept pressing to her forehead, her breath coming in rattling bursts that filled the cabin with quiet dread. Ayanna hadn't slept. She sat at her sister's side like stone, only her eyes moving, tracking every twitch, every shiver. Ezekiel had seen dying before, plenty of cattle, even neighbors. But this was different. This was personal, and it shouldn't have been. He leaned against the rough log wall, staring at the floorboards like they held answers. Helping them had felt right, still did. But right and safe were never the same thing out here. If anyone found out, if a rider passed by and saw even a glimpse of what lay inside his home, he'd hang. No trial, no jury. Harboring wounded Apache, especially ones that looked bred for war, was enough to get a man's neck snapped by the law or strung up by a tree by frightened neighbors. He knew the stories. Settlers who collaborated, who were accused of siding with the enemy. They didn't get warnings. They disappeared. His rifle leaned against the door, 12 rounds left. Not enough if riders came with questions and nerves on edge. Not enough if this ended the way most things did out here, in smoke and gunpowder. "You should go," Ayanna said suddenly, voice quiet but sharp. Her English was broken, but not unsure. "Leave us. You saved. That is enough." He looked up. Her gaze was steady, but her jaw was tight with pain and pride. She was offering him a way out, a clean break. But all he could see was the river again, months ago, when he'd found that girl half submerged beneath a fallen log, her skin blue, breath shallow. He thought she was dead until her fingers moved. He'd built a fire with wet wood, fed her spoonfuls of broth, stayed up 3 nights chasing the fever out of her body. She hadn't spoken much, didn't give a name. Just vanished into the forest one morning, leaving behind a small pouch of carved bone as thanks. He still kept it in a drawer, tucked between old bullets and dried tobacco. Ezekiel dragged a hand over his face. "I've done this before," he muttered. Ayanna watched him, curious but silent. "Girl down by the creek, Apache, nearly drowned. I helped her, never told anyone." Something shifted in Ayanna's face, not shock, recognition. "You, Riverman," she said. It wasn't a question. He felt the ground shift under him. That word meant something to her. A story passed along, maybe a promise, maybe a warning. He stood and crossed to the window, heart heavy. Outside, the land stretched silent and cold. A good place for secrets, a better place for graves. "I won't run," he said finally. Ayanna nodded once, slow, respectful. From the bed, Itel moaned in her sleep, and Ezekiel turned back toward her. Compassion, he realized, was no longer a choice. It was a debt. They came just before sundown, 5 riders, high on the southern ridge, their silhouettes sharp against the bleeding sky. Ezekiel saw them through the cracked shutters, unmoving atop their horses, painted faces catching the last light like ghosts born of dust and vengeance. Apache, armed, watching. He stepped back from the window slowly, heart hammering like hooves in his chest. The room felt suddenly too small, too loud with every creak of the floorboards and rustle of fabric. He turned toward Ayanna, who hadn't moved from her sister's side since morning. But her body had gone still, alert in a way that needed no words. "They found you," he said. She didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at him, she whispered, "They were not meant to." Ezekiel moved to the table, grabbed the rifle. His hands shook just a little. "Who are they?" Ayanna rose, slow and quiet. Even after days without sleep and blood drying on her skin, she stood tall, taller than any man he'd ever known. "Warriors loyal to Chief's son," she said, "sent to bring us back, or silence us." His eyes darted toward Itel, still burning with fever on the cot. "Your own people?" Ayanna nodded once. Itel refused him. The son said no. Ezekiel blinked. "Marriage?" "Marriage," she confirmed. He took offense. "Sent men to punish her, to take her. We ran. That's why she's bleeding out in my house," he asked, almost choking on the anger suddenly rising in his chest. Ayanna looked at him then, really looked. And behind the hardness in her eyes, he saw something else. Regret, maybe. Or shame. "We are daughters of Nalish," she said. "Our blood is strong. That makes us valuable, but not safe." Outside, one of the riders raised a hand. A signal, not an attack, yet. Just a message. "We see you, we're coming." "How many bullets you got?" Ayanna asked. 12 for the rifle, 6 for the pistol." "Not enough." "No." The silence between them was heavy, but not hopeless. "They'll come at night," she said. "They don't want to be seen by settlers." "They think I'm hiding you?" "They know." He cursed under his breath, then paused. "What happens if they take you back?" Her jaw tightened. "Then my sister becomes a wife to a man who breaks women. And I'd die first." She said it like a simple truth, like sunrise. Ezekiel looked at her, this towering woman with blood on her skin and fire in her bones, and felt the weight of it all settle on his shoulders. If he gave them up, they might let him live. Might. But there were worse things than dying. The first rider began to descend. Ezekiel tightened his grip on the rifle. This was no longer just about survival. It was about what a man stood for when the world came knocking with torches and chains. They waited in silence as the sun bled out behind the hills. The Apache riders hadn't moved in nearly an hour, just watched, still as death, their horses shifting now and then like restless shadows. Ezekiel sat near the window, rifle across his lap, sweat drying on his neck despite the cooling air. Inside, the cabin felt like a trap, every wall inching closer. Ayanna stood beside her sister, one hand resting on Itel's shoulder, the other gripping the hilt of a long, curved knife she'd pulled from the folds of her belt. Her eyes never left the ridge. "Why haven't they come down yet?" Ezekiel asked. "They wait," she murmured, "for night, for fear." He nodded slowly. "They're going to kill us." Ayanna didn't answer, and that silence said more than words. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice low, as if the shadows might be listening. 3 moons ago, a girl was found by the river, half dead, fevered. White man pulled her from the water, gave her fire, food, left without name. Ezekiel stiffened. She returned to us. Said nothing at first. Then she told the truth. Said a settler helped her live, risked his life for her. He turned toward her. That was months ago. Ayanna looked at him now, eyes narrowing like she was trying to see through him. That girl is my sister too, youngest of us, Nalish's last daughter. Ezekiel felt his breath hitch. She called you Riverman. His mouth went dry. That small figure on the riverbank, blue-lipped and trembling, no more than 14. He remembered holding her hand until the fever broke. She had never told him her name. Your father, he said slowly. Your chief owes blood debt, Ayanna finished. You saved his child's life. According to our law, your life is now protected. By him. By us. Ezekiel blinked. That's why those warriors aren't killing me yet. They know the story. They came to test it, to see if Riverman is real. He let the weight of it sink in. A sacred obligation, a debt between enemies, a thread stretched across blood and land and history, and somehow it was holding. I didn't do it for payment, he said. Ayanna's gaze softened, just slightly. That's why the debt holds. Outside, one of the riders began to move, not down the hill, just pacing the ridge like a wolf too patient to be called hungry. If you call in the debt, she said, it might stop the killing. For now. Ezekiel looked down at his hands, calloused, trembling. He hadn't meant to become part of this. He just hadn't wanted a child to die alone. I never told anyone, he whispered. Not once. Now you must, Ayanna said, her voice steady. Or we all die. The sun disappeared, the first stars appeared, and far off, a wolf began to howl. The knock didn't come as a knock. It came as a voice, sharp, commanding, too confident to be anyone local. Marsh, we know you're in there. Step outside, hands where we can see 'em. Ezekiel's blood turned cold. He moved to the window, careful not to disturb the curtain. 3 men. Federal badges catching the fading light. One of them, William Kane, sat tall in the saddle, his voice already drawing lines in the dirt. Tracking party followed sign from the Morrison place, Kane called out. Said it ended near your fence. You see any Apache come through? Ezekiel's throat tightened. The Morrison Ranch was a day's ride east. Rumors had already started. Burned sheds, a missing boy, blood on the porch. Whether Apache were actually involved didn't matter. Folks wanted someone to hang. Inside, Ayanna had moved fast. She lifted Etel with quiet strength, carried her to the cellar hatch beneath the rug. The trap door creaked as it opened. The sisters vanished below without a word, not fear in their faces, just grim readiness. Ezekiel kicked the rug back over the boards, then opened the door. Kane dismounted with the self-assurance of a man who'd never had to ask permission. His eyes scanned the yard, the porch, the faint smears of mud near the doorway. You been chopping wood, Marsh? He asked. There's blood out here. Axe slipped, Ezekiel replied. Caught my arm. Kane held out his hand. Let's see it. Ezekiel hesitated. 1 second too long. Kane's expression darkened. No wound, the marshal asked. That's odd. One of the deputies crouched, touching the drying mud near the porch. These footprints, he said. Jesus, that's not a man's boot. Ezekiel saw it unraveling. Fast. One more lie and they'd come inside with guns drawn. One more denial, and Ayanna would come up from that cellar with a blade in her hand and nothing left to lose. He exhaled, slowly. There are 2 Apache women here, he said. Kane stepped back. You're admitting it? They came hurt, half dead. I gave them shelter. They attacked the Morrison place, Kane snapped. You're harboring killers. I don't know what happened at Morrison's, Ezekiel said, but these women haven't lifted a hand against me. Doesn't matter. Law's the law. You shelter Apache, you're no better than them. Ezekiel didn't blink. Then I guess I'm no better. Kane stared at him for a long time. Behind the badge, behind the practiced authority, something flickered. Disbelief, maybe, or contempt. Marsh, he said coldly, you just signed your own death warrant. And maybe he had. But as the last light vanished and the wind rose again, Ezekiel felt something else. Peace. Because in the end, he hadn't saved them to stay alive. He'd save them because no one else would. They heard the cellar hatch creak just before it happened. Ezekiel turned, ready to stop her, but it was too late. Ayanna was already climbing up through the floor, her silhouette filling the cabin like a rising mountain. She moved without hesitation, the way only someone walked when death had already been accepted. No, he whispered, stepping toward her, but she met his eyes with something solid and calm. I will speak. And then she opened the door. The wind hit her first, whipping through her dark hair, lifting the ends of her torn tunic. The marshals turned as one, and they stared. Even Kane took a step back when he saw her fully. No one was prepared for her size, nearly 7 feet tall, shoulders like carved stone, her presence turning the yard into a battlefield without a shot fired. She didn't flinch under their rifles, didn't cower. I am Ayanna, she said clearly, daughter of Chief Nalish. Kane barked a laugh, almost too sharp to sound human. I don't care if you're the daughter of God himself. You're under arrest. No, Ayanna said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. I call blood debt. That stopped him. Ezekiel watched the men glance at each other. They had heard of it. Stories whispered around fire pits, passed along by scouts and Indian fighters. A sacred promise, deeper than loyalty, stronger than law. A what? Kane growled, though his voice had dropped an inch in confidence. This man, Ayanna said, motioning to Ezekiel without looking at him, saved the life of my sister. Not once, twice. First by river, then here. When we were hunted, when we were dying. Kane raised his rifle a little higher. That don't matter under federal law. But it matters under Apache law, Ayanna said. And your treaty, your own treaty, says tribal customs must be honored when blood is owed. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Kane shifted in place. His jaw twitched. He didn't like being reminded of treaties, especially ones written to prevent war. My father comes, Ayanna said. At sunrise, he will speak for us. He will decide. And if he doesn't, Kane asked. Then I will die, she replied, simple as stating the weather. Kane's eyes narrowed. We wait till dawn. But if your father doesn't come, or if I don't like what he says, you will do what you came to do, she said, but not before. Ezekiel stepped beside her then, rifle loose in his grip, not aiming, just standing. That night, no one slept. Not the marshals who kept shifting their rifles, not Ezekiel who paced with every coyote's cry, not Ayanna who stood like a statue at the window watching the dark horizon for the first sign of her father. Dawn would bring judgment, one way or another. The sun rose slow and red, casting long shadows across the valley as if even the land was holding its breath. Ezekiel stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, boots planted in dirt still damp from the storm. Ayanna was beside him, tall as the morning, silent and unblinking. Behind them, Kane and his men waited, rifles loaded, nerves taut like bowstrings. Then came the sound, hoofbeats, Not rushed, not aggressive, measured, intentional. 6 riders crested the northern ridge just as the light touched their faces. No war party, no blood banners, just Chief Nalish and 5 elders, each painted in ceremonial black and white, their faces unreadable, their presence as heavy as stone. The chief dismounted first, older than Ezekiel expected, but not frail. He moved with a warrior's precision, a quiet authority that didn't need announcing. His gaze swept the scene, pausing briefly on Ayanna, then longer on Ezekiel. "You are Ezekiel Marsh," he said, not a question. Ezekiel nodded once. "Yes, sir." "You saved my daughter," Nalish said. "Not once, but twice." Ezekiel didn't speak. The wind was the only sound, rushing through brittle grass like whispers. "My youngest, you pulled from the river," Nalish continued. "Left no name, took no reward." Ezekiel shifted. She was a child. She needed help. "And now," the chief said, eyes narrowing, "you shelter my other daughters. When the law, your people, threatened death for it." Cain stepped forward, bristling. "Your daughters are suspects in a settler killing. Harboring them is a federal crime." Nalish turned his gaze on Cain. "Under federal treaty," he said, voice smooth as flint, "tribal customs are honored in matters concerning tribal members. You signed that paper with your own hands." Cain's mouth opened, but no words came. Nalish turned back to Ezekiel. "Apache law says a man who saves a child owes no debt, but a man who saves 3 daughters and stands ready to die for them is more than friend." He reached into a leather pouch and withdrew a necklace, bone, silver, and turquoise, the kind worn only by those of the bloodline. "Ezekiel Marsh," he said, "by deed and honor, I adopt you into the Nalish family. From this moment, you are son of my house, protected under our name, under our law." Ayanna inhaled sharply. Ezekiel felt the world tilt beneath him. Cain swore under his breath. Nalish stepped forward and placed the necklace around Ezekiel's neck. "You have family now," the chief said, "and the law will respect it." Cain looked like a man who'd swallowed a nail. "This isn't over," he muttered. "No," Nalish said. "It has just begun." The chief turned back toward his horse, but not before casting one last glance at Ayanna. She hadn't moved, but her eyes shimmered with something unreadable. Pride, maybe, or something deeper. And for the first time in years, Ezekiel Marsh belonged somewhere. Even if it meant everything was about to change. The days that followed were quiet, but only on the surface. The Marshalls had left, forced to accept the adoption, but their silence felt more like retreat than surrender. Ezekiel's ranch, once forgotten by the world, had become the center of something larger, legal, political, personal. And under all of it, something heavier still pressed against his chest. Ayanna kept her distance, but not out of coldness. She was always near, helping Itel recover, tending to the horses, walking the fence line with eyes sharp as flint. But she avoided being alone with him. When their hands brushed, they pulled back too fast. When their eyes met, neither spoke. Ezekiel told himself it was enough. Safety had come. The sisters lived. His land was his own again. He had family now. But each time he looked at Ayanna, tall and quiet beneath the evening sky, he felt something burning behind his ribs. One night, as dusk bled over the hills and the world sank into blue, she found him by the corral. He didn't hear her approach. She moved like mist when she wanted to, but he felt her before she spoke. "You carry weight," she said softly. He nodded. "Try not to." She studied him, arms crossed over her chest, the wind tugging gently at her hair. "You are brother now," she said, "to me. By law." He didn't answer. He couldn't. "But I do not feel like your sister," she said. He turned, and there it was in her face, unhidden, brave. "Nor I like your brother," he said. Ayanna stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the sage in her skin, close enough to see the flicker of fear beneath all that strength. "I have not said this before, because honor matters. But I love you, Ezekiel. Since that first night in the blood and rain, I thought it would fade. It hasn't." His throat tightened. "I've been trying to bury it," he whispered, "but it won't stay buried." They stood like that for a long moment, the last of the sunlight painting gold across her cheekbones. The next morning they went to Chief Nailish. He listened in silence, his face unreadable. When Ayanna finished, he looked to Ezekiel. "This is not a small thing," the chief said. "You were adopted to protect. That law is sacred." "I know," Ezekiel said, "but I can't lie to it. Not when it's love." Nailish stared at them both. Then slowly his expression softened. "Then I must undo what I created." He reached into his pouch, pulled the necklace from Ezekiel's neck with quiet ceremony. "I release you from blood," he said, "but if you choose, you may enter by marriage." Ayanna's fingers found Ezekiel's, warm, steady. "I choose," she said. And for the first time since that storm, Ezekiel knew what it meant to be free. The wedding took place beneath the cottonwoods, where the river curved wide and slow through Ezekiel's land. It was Ayanna's choice. "Water remembers," she'd said. "It saw you first." So they stood where sky met earth, and where her people believed spirit passed freely between the worlds. The elders came dressed in ceremony, faces painted with ash and ochre, feathers woven into braids. Ezekiel wore a freshly sewn vest with beads stitched by Itel herself, rough but careful, like everything she did. Federal papers were signed quietly by a traveling judge, pale and sweating in the heat, flanked by 2 silent marshals who'd been ordered not to interfere. No church bells, no white lace, no promises spoken in English alone, just a fire, a circle of stone, and 2 hands joined beneath open sky. Ayanna wore bone and turquoise, her towering frame draped in white deer hide. She looked like something carved from myth, powerful, certain, eternal. When she turned to Ezekiel, the world quieted. "You were not born for us," she said, voice strong enough to carry past the trees. "But the river brought you anyway." He answered with no grand speech, just a quiet, "I'm here." And in that, everything they needed was said. Itel stood beside them as witness, her own strength still shadowed by the wound she carried, but her smile was easy, wide. She had returned to full height, walking without help now, her presence just as formidable, her laughter returning in bursts that echoed across the valley. Word spread, faster than fires ever could. The white man who married a chief's daughter, the 2 giant women who could carry a steer and still stitch beads with hands careful enough for eagle feathers. The ranch, once a forgotten patch of dying earth, became a place of passage, a trading post where no one asked for papers, but everyone gave their name. Apache brought horses, hides, and stories. Settlers brought flour, tools, and awe. They built it slowly, a larger barn, a storage house, a new well. Ayanna handled lumber like it was straw. Itel brokered trades that made stubborn men blink twice. Ezekiel handled the money and the diplomacy. 3 giants, each in their own way. But more than anything, they became something the frontier had never seen. Proof. That strength could build instead of break. That law could bend toward respect. That love, in its rarest, truest form, could cross borders no bullet ever could. Some nights when the fire was low and the stars poured like salt across the sky, travelers asked for the story. And Ezekiel would smile, glance at his wife beside him, taller than any man, fierce as any flame, and say only, "It started with a storm, and 2 women I should have feared but chose to save. And just like that, a legend was born.